And we are live. Today I am joined by an ever wonderful but interesting guest. Formerly was on the Jay Burden show, now on my show, and is the first person to be on since my rebrand. How are you doing, Mikeofpol?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for having me on. It's the Jay Burden stream always haunts me. Everyone wants to bring it up. So many shit takes, so many bad opinions. It's a good time. But thank you for having me on, in spite of the bad appearance. No, I just kid. Jay Burden's a good fella, and I hope his post marriage success just keeps on going up.
Indeed, if there's anyone who's going to build the based futurist Virginia, it's going to be him. And
Oh,
it's
dude,
like,
Baseball, Virginia under Jay Burden will be so amazing. I'll move there. And I love the state I'm in, but I'll move there if Jay Burden's in charge. That's for sure.
that definitely would be interesting. But I was interesting to have you on because you were talking about how we can kind of use praxis of the left and kind of reverse engineer them and actually steal them to suit our ideas. So can you kind of go into how that would work and like why that's important and
Sure,
why the
sure.
average judge care about this?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the One Ring. If you dare tempt to use it, you'll probably end up cringe like myself. But no, why the average chud, why the average sensitive young man should probably care about something like this is actually, I'm kind of working out a methodological way of reading the left, um, and I haven't hammered it out perfectly, but I think broadly there's three different categories of the left theory cell. One being someone that actually has a lot of great points, someone you can actually draw some insight and wisdom from their diagnosis of modernity, because I'm talking specifically about like post Marxist, post structuralist, uh, or even post left, the modern post left. Uh, those people are good diagnosticians of kind of the decline. They have a different way of defining it, and it uses a bunch of language differences, a bunch of different coded language that it, it doesn't vibe with us. But if I think you can pass that through a translation layer and get something that's not gay out of it, essentially. So that those would be thinkers like Jean Baudrillard. I consider myself a student of Jean Baudrillard. I very much think that if you read him seriously through a lot of his works, you see like, oh, this guy has a little bit of Nick Land in him. He's got a little bit of just like a base Twitter anon in him, and he's also got something that's harder to understand that comes from a leftist theory type of idea, but you can actually expand that out into this is something that the left fears, or this is something that the regime fears, or it's a enumeration of some amount of fear from somebody. You can use that as a pain point. I don't think the average anon has to stand by and wait for elite theory to play its course. I think you can participate, not in a populist way, but in a you can choose to try to become. Yes, cat. Oh, come on, you stupid cat. Go. Sorry about that. You can choose to try to become a great man of history type of guy. You can be that guy. You can be, HH's top guy, if you will. Um, you can attempt that. And what I want to try to get at is a little bit of Jean Baudrillard's kind of theory selling about like the decline of modernity, and in going back to his text, The Agony of Power. This was the last text that he wrote before he died of cancer. And I think there's a lot of the stuff where you go, oh, that sounds like Nick Land. Oh, this sounds like right wing Twitter anon. And does this lead us to something that the average person can use as a technical tool in order to step up their game? Like, as AA says, League of Tens. Do you want to try to get to a 10 and try to actually put some stuff in motion or not? And I think the best way to filter for people who will become 10s is if they step up and try something. And that's kind of like the broad scheme which I want to kind of diagnose.
Yeah, I think we also have this a lot of us has this misconception of what a 10 means. A 10 doesn't mean like necessarily that you have to be basically based a George Soros in order to do anything. I think there's this misconception because A is so elitist. That, like that's you know you only if you're a billionaire can you actually make change. I mean, partially that's true, but like, and if you just become the best version of yourself and actually become a better part of your community, you can actually affect great change, and that will inspire the future generation that will become elites to your ideas. That's actually what it means to become a 10. Um,
Exactly. And so this is where I want to bring in, like, there's going to be a lot of reading in here. I'm sorry guys, you're going to have to learn to read. I know you've been putting it off for a long time, but you're going to have to do it. So, I will read along with you for this first like bedtime story. But let's start with John Baudrillard's The Agony of Power, page 37, right? This is from the sub book because it's a collection of 3 smaller books, From Domination to Hegemony. So, broadly he's talking about here is that domination is the old school way of power ruling. So, for instance, think the British Raj. Domination, it has to instantiate some amount of permanent moral virtue that the regime holds onto people that are being dominated, right? He says that, okay, in hyperreality, in postmodernity, we actually have something different. Domination has given way to power um, putting itself upon people in a different way, in kind of this way of self effacement. Power self effaces and challenges you to self efface as much as possible. You must reject all of your values, right? You must become the gray goo person. You must become the bug person. And in this, he says, here's the pull quote: caught in a vast Stockholm syndrome, the alienated, the oppressed, and the colonized are siding with the system that holds them hostage. They are now annexed, in the literal sense, prisoners of the nexus of the network, connected for better or worse. And this has a double valence. This is a double meaning. This, when he says the oppressed and all this stuff, of course he's talking about, this is from 2005, I think he wrote this text. He's talking about the ideas before the progressive stack of like LGBTQIA, BIPOC, whatever, like the progressive stack of oppressed people. He's talking about that, but there's a double valence in there. Everyone is actually oppressed by modernity through this gray gooification. So you, as a right winger, you are caught in Stockholm syndrome, alienated and oppressed. You're colonized and you're brought into the nexus of information, connected networks. He talks about hegemony being domination was a physically violent act, whereas um, hegemony, the new form of rulership, actually is like a calculating fox elite type of action, right? So you are also caught up in the calculating networkification of the world that people like the ad agency people at Google, whenever they do psychological profiles of people, that data gets mashed around a bunch of different companies until it gets passed on to people that want to actually manipulate you, not just sell you stuff, right? So you are participating when you give your data over to Google, or even Twitter at this point. We don't know who Twitter still sells their ad data to. Like, in some sense, like all of the surrogate activities, like in the Kaczynski sense, when you participate in these, you are also giving into the Stockholm syndrome, right? As a right wing person, right? So that's another like big thing is like, well, your participation, you have to find a different way of revolting against this, because like we're caught in Stockholm syndrome. You don't realize that you love being dominated like this in the self-effacement type of what do they call it, embarrassment ritual. People have taken it to calling it something
Oh,
else.
humiliation ritual, I think is the term
Humiliation ritual. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're
You
looking
don't
for.
realize. Yeah, you don't realize you're kind of in love with this. So like, this is a way that I want right wing people to like step out of their frame, realize that like, oh hey, this left wing person is talking about something that actually applies to me, and go, there's something revelatory here, if that makes sense.
I agree. It's also going back to that humiliation ritual. The right has this mindset I like to call battered spouse mentality, where they've just been beaten and like whipped by the left for like 100 years at this point, and like almost like beating whipped and like crying about defeat is kind of their identity now. Their identity is defined by this relationship that they've had of complete domination by the left. And so that's why they have this battered spouse mentality, which is why they actually aren't a serious threat
Yeah,
to the left.
this is exactly correct. I think there's something to uh this might be something that the Nietzscheans are kind of pointing out with like slave morality when they keep just yelling slave morality over and over and over again. Like, I don't consider myself a Nietzschean, but I appreciate them like in the right wing nexus people. Like, and I kind of get what they're saying and why that has a connection here as well. Is you're kind of giving in to not stepping over when you should be stepping over this. Like, why are you so concerned with the addiction to losing as well?
Also, another part of that, it's not just the mindset. It's the fact that the actual genuine right wing has been outlawed essentially since like 1945, or you can even argue before that, since the New Dealers, as Thomas will argue. But either way, it's been effectively outlawed and replaced with code bin at checkout. The
Right.
GDP and our greatest ally forever. Conservatism, basically.
What are you talking about there? What, are you insinuating someone there?
No,
No,
no.
no, 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 no.
So, and I think this leads into another point. So this is page 41 from the same book. We have entered into we have entered into a hegemonic form of total reality of closed circuit global power that has even captured the negative, right? So what this perfectly summarizes what you were talking about is even the negative. He's talking about the negative left dialectic in terms of like radical critique and like what he was talking about in his time, like critical theory and stuff. But this also applies to us, right? The negative is captured. He's talking about the system in its total control of nodes networks and in making everyone bend the knee to humiliation in humiliation. He's also talking about they have a perfect signifier, a perfect symbolic representation of who has bent the knee and who hasn't bent the knee, and it comes in this certain amount of like politiques of the day, du jour politics and stuff like that. That oh, today the Con Inc. is going to talk about the GDP, and then they're going to talk about AOC, and then they're going to talk about this and talk about that, right? And so this is a very good diagnostic tool of like, oh yeah, he's talking about me as well. Like, I just want to keep hammering that home. That there's something to this here.
I definitely agree there's something to that mindset. But I think we have to get rid of the fundamental losers, and like just like essentially controlled opposition nature of the right, which still dominates the mainstream, still, quite frankly, and the boomers, which are kind of important because they control the financial resources and increasingly all the real estate in this country,
Right.
because all the older generations basically have shit. So
Right.
like, it is kind of important.
And it even goes to show, I mean, even the kind of like control your spending boomercon conceit of like your second vote is with your wallet type stuff. It's like, that is very true. I would much rather you buy all your soaps from our good friend on Twitter, Dissident Soaps. Like, I would much rather you choose to not buy Procter and Gamble and stuff like that. And it's like, really go with someone who's not controlled opposition. But at the same time, there is just always this sloth floating around of like, what was that beer that came out after the Mulvaney thing with Bud Light? It was like, it was called Ultra Light beer or something like that, or Ultra Right beer or something like that. Had a
I
very
don't know,
clean
because I don't
commercial.
drink beer because it's gay and homosexual. It's gay.
Yeah, exactly. I drink wine. I'm a sophisticated individual.
But of course, we're talking about the base of America, which is red America. So we have to understand like nature of this. And obviously, I sympathize with them because I come from them. So this is important.
Well, this is also a elite theory point as well, right? Elite theory says that, like, who was it? Mosca that said that, there were people who were still cops through all three stages of the French Revolution in the the pre-revolution, during the revolution, and then after the revolution into what republic was that? The third republic, second republic? Who cares? What the Frenchies, they number the republics and stuff. But he basically outlined that there were people that were just followers this whole time, and I think that's what a lot of this controlled opposition actually is like this kind of yearning to follow a little bit. But people have a certain aesthetic preference to have like put up a little bit of this like resistance, a little bit, but it has like a American classical American tinge, and it's deadly effective, right? This goes back to someone who's unrelated, like a nudge theory from Sunstein. Who was it? Richard H. Thaler and Cass R. Sunstein, right? It's almost like these choices have been engineered for us, and that's actually the language that they use in that text about how marketing kind of engineers our choices for us beforehand, and that's how controlled opposition works nowadays.
Well, it's also like the choice, even this like I hate bringing up the libertarians here for this argument of, well, you got the free market, so you don't have to buy the gay tranny beer. You can buy this based right wing beer. When in reality, almost all beer is controlled by like 3 companies, so like there is no choice.
Or anything
the
else,
choice
like-
is illusion.
Or anything else, like it's
It's all the same company. Like they're all like Pepsi and Disney and Coke, and that's it.
That's a very good point, because like I do often point people to, there's this website called secondvote.com, and it is BoomerCon cringe, like next level cringe. However, they do a good, like from what I've seen, like I've gone through their data set and their analysis and stuff like that, and it seems to be rigorous enough for me to trust. They do a very good job at enumerating companies and their political biases and basically how captured they are. They can't tell you which companies are not captured, because not captured to them basically means like Fortune 1000 and about to be captured. Yeah, in their analysis, like in my analysis of their analysis, right? But they do a fairly good job of enumerating, like, well, can you do the least amount of damage with buying these people versus those people? And I think that's a fair enough example. However, like I do want to, like, part of this whole exercise of going through the leftists into Praxis is to eventually get to justifying for the right wing to take up what the libertarians said was like gray market counter economics. I think that is something we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater from libertarianism. I think that's useful. I think there is something to, like, oh, Dissonant Soaps guy, he's like, I am literally the base soaps guy, slash R guy. I think we need more of that, for sure. And there's no better way to build our network than to start some of these entrepreneurial exercises, and then eventually figure out who's Ford 2 or who's Ford 1, who's Ford Senior. Right? Because if we have a Ford Senior, if we have a Peter Thiel that's like really our guy, then we really have a shot. Otherwise, it's just participating in counter economics and towards like the actual Peter Thiel taking power, which is like, fine, I don't know. He runs Palantir. Palantir scares the hell out of me. It should probably scare the hell out of you guys. But if there's something there, right? If you're either participating in towards your pet elite taking power, or you're trying to get your own elite started.
I agree. And I'm not saying that we should like, because cringe people do, start these right wing companies and they fail most of the time. Like, you shouldn't ever try to build your own based dissident company. I'm not saying that. However, a couple of things I would say is don't use like the most like esoteric names like CthulhuCandies.com. like listen, I get it, it's based, but like we're trying to appear to the normies here a little bit, and when you say stuff like that, they're not going to understand that. Like their vocabulary is limited to NASCAR, Coke, and like MAGA and in the church, so like you got to appeal to their language, like. And you need to appeal to more people. You can't just be like this tiny, that's not way companies actually function and grow. Like you have to appeal to a wider market is the point. And like we seem to have this problem where like they'll choose the stupidest names ever. Like, do you remember when the Daily Wire made their own like candy company? It was called like base chocolate, whatever. It's
Oh no.
retarded and nobody wants to buy it. You know what I mean? It's the same problem we're running into where they choose the dumbest names ever.
So on one point, you're correct. If someone is trying to sell to mass market appeal, you are absolutely correct. But niche market appeal is a different it is a different lane that you can travel into, right? So someone like Cody Will, like I come from the gun printers to our sphere, so I have a different conception of like cottage industry and counter economics praxis than I think a lot of our guys. So what I want to kind of point us at is like this goes back to Baudrillard, page 53 of the same book. The only response to this increasingly violent domination is an equally violent form, terrorism, an extreme reaction to the situation of impossible exchange. He's not talking about, like, go do the thing. He's talking about symbolic. He's talking about a symbolic exchange, right? He's talking about what Zizek calls virtue terrorism, right? So niche market appeal is something like Cody Wilson with the Ghost Gunner CNC machine, right? Very niche market. There's only a few people, including me, that own one, right? But that is a symbolic exchange to the powers that be, right? And that's just participating in economic sphere. Do not do anything effing retarded, guys. I'm talking about there is a symbolic level of the economic, and the symbolic level of the economic is what Baudrillard is talking about through all of his books, right? You are actually proffering some amount of challenge to power if you do it correctly, right? I'm selling a product that's pointing at George Soros and say, hey, watch this. I'm selling a box that makes guns to someone. Doesn't that piss you off? That's what he's talking about. I'm not talking about doing the dum-dum. Don't do the dum-dum.
Yeah, please trust me. I know it's very tempting, but like that's what they want you to do because then they can like
Exactly.
easily, easy again. We're overwhelmed by our enemies here, and like we have to say it that they control all institutions. So any attempt, to throw yourself to stop the rail car is going to be a wasted resource. We need you here. You're better useful to us alive than dead or in prison. Like you need to
Right.
remember that. It's very important. This is very important to understand.
So in the theory of Cody Wilson, self-immolation worked during the Arab Spring because it was domination. As Baudrillard puts it, domination, right? Nowadays, we live in hyper-reality. That doesn't work. You have to proffer something more symbolic than just giving your own life. It's actually giving your own life over and over and over again, something like an economic venture, right? Something like Cody Wilson saying, I am going to dedicate my life to selling CNC machines whose their only job is making guns, right? Like this is going to piss off the elite. All the marketing is not pointed at my clientele. The niche market actually buys itself because of the project that I'm trying to undertake. It's a purely symbolic exchange, and people will appreciate that symbolic exchange that you're doing with the elite if they are /R guys, right? The slash little guys will appreciate that, and that's why I want to get you guys thinking about.
Yeah, we need to be smart with our resources and manpower that we have. Again, we're a tiny minority. Again, we're extremely based and smart, and that's great. But again, we're a tiny minority, so we're building the foundations of something here. And so we're gonna need all of us as much as we can together to actually get this thing going off the ground as fast as possible. I know we all want to sit there and play Call of Duty, just saying, coping with well, Caesar's gonna come any moment. I'm just riding the tiger. Well, I don't know about that. So you might want to actually try to build something before they come and put you in the gulag,
Right.
and nobody's there to help you.
So here's something from the last page, page 56 of the Agony of Power, last page of Domination to Hegemony, right? He says, in other words, and I want you to think about Tucker Carlson's Heritage Foundation speech when I say this. In other words, a confrontation that is no longer precisely political, but metaphysical and symbolic in the strong sense. It is a confrontation, a divide that exists not only at the heart of the domination of power, but at the heart of our individual existence, right? And Tucker Carlson said the same thing. This is a fight with evil in his Heritage Foundation speech. The one that, some are fingering as probably the reason that he got canned, right? Like, Baudrillard is saying the same thing in 2005, that there is something metaphysical about the soul eaters that are coming after us, or the soul eating process that dominates over us, right?
I mean, I don't know how you couldn't look in reality into the year 2023 when they're mutilating kids and like they're dying because they're trying to give them fake penises, and like these are also the same people trying to normalize pedophilia, and you're not going to say, well, there's nothing metaphysical about that, bro. It's just power and politics. No, there's a bigger element there, and it's just called they're evil. It's very simple. I gotta tap the sign. We do a little bit of tapping the sign, but like it's very simple. They're evil, and they want to diddle your kids. It's very very simple to the point. We all get it at this point.
Or we should, and I think anyone that doesn't get it yet, but is on the cusp, but like I don't think it's nonsensical to try to red pill people that are right on the cusp. They're, it's, Christ said that we're fishermen of men, right? And I think it is our duty to, save as many as possible. Like, if you can save someone from the naivete of thinking, well, maybe my kid is just needs a surgery on, his nether regions. Like if you have any opportunity to stop that, like, this is definitely what I'm talking about. This is that would be a symbolic exchange with power, saying like, I saved one kid from that. I think that's important as well. And so I think this whole, black pilling parade about like, oh, just give up on the normies. I don't think it's a wasted effort if you convince one parent to push back on, most of the time, an insane mother saying that, oh, little Jimmy needs to cut his penis off. Like, that's fine to do. Please do that. It's more.
Yeah, that's one recruit you're taking away from the enemy. And that's one recruit you're potentially bringing over to us, which is an invaluable resource that, like, the left, like, inherently the left's ideology doesn't breed enough people. So what do they do to compensate for that? Well, they steal your kids in immigration. So if you can cut those two things off, the left will actually naturally die out. So that's the process we're trying to prognosticate to be as efficient as possible. But that's kind of the bottleneck. And I see that as the big weakness that we can't exploit if we had smart people.
I think there's a more sophisticated lens to look through it, actually. I think the more sophisticated way to look at it is these people who are GROOMERS. Yeah, I don't know how much safety language we have to use on YouTube because I'm an Odyssey guy, but those guys, the people who want to recruit the youth in that sort of way, keep in mind, they actually view themselves as farmers more than they do as recruiters. They see themselves as taking a harvest. If you see these teachers that are on like libs of TikTok, it's much more clear to me that they are actually harvesting a flock of sheep than they are some sort of recruiting agent or something like that. They seem way more well-meaning, and who's well-meaning? A shepherd, but a demonic shepherd at that. So I think that's probably a better heuristic to look at these type of people. If you catch my drift.
Yeah, that probably is a better metaphor, but yeah, the outcome is still the same. Deploying the enemy of bodies and soldiers, which is the key to reducing their effectiveness.
Which goes back to symbolic exchange and the T word I'm not allowed to say, I'm pretty sure, is actually what you're doing is setting fire to crops. Think about it this way. Like, there is a symbolic level to what you do as Praxis, right? And how does that symbolically F over the regime, right? It's like, as much as your practical efforts mess up the regime, right? Like, in terms of depriving one body to the horde, right? You're also thinking about, like, look, these are epic times that we live in. History and magic still lives in this time. There's still something of the Plato's metaphysical plane in our life today, right? As much as I'm a Christian and don't necessarily believe that, but there is a metaphysical and symbolic way of looking at what you're doing, and it's for the righteous. So internalize that for a moment, if you will.
Yeah, that's kind of the main critique of the black pill, right? Is that it's basically an excuse to say, well, it's all over, so I'm just gonna go ahead and play my Call of Duty 5, and chow down on some a Super Mario cereal as I lament about the progressives being in charge of my society until they come to the door eventually and put you in the gulag. Well,
Right.
again, like you're kind of just making excuses for the laziness that you already are justifying. So the black pill is actually part of the enemy's tactics here to demoralize you, and that's what they want. They want you demoralized. They want you to do stupid actions. They want you to get arrested, harm people, discredit the movement. All part of their aims of depriving us of our limited capital and resources. Again, these are tactics the enemy is using. So the black pill is one of them. And I think it needs to be recognized as a tactic.
Right.
Hmm.
But instead, and like, to belabor the point one last time until I think we can move on to the next quote, would be like, there's this divine virtue that you're trying to live up to every time you take action, right? And so I think that's where we can leave that, and I think we can move on to another quote. So this is from the next book in the Agony of Power, which is The White Terror of World Order, right? And this is on page 61. And therefore, driven into automatic self-destruction by extensible mechanisms of its destruction. And he's talking about the system in general, right? The system of creating hyperreality, of control of these mechanical systems that kind of like form the overlayer of the matrix that we live in. Right? He's saying that there is a means inside of the matrix in order to make it self-destruct. Right. So this goes back to, gun printer. Of course, I've always got to, give my credence to Cody Wilson. That's what he kind of envisioned, right? So there's Cody Wilson comes from a lineage of the three generations of techno optimists, right? Generation one were the people that founded Silicon Valley and thought that the technological innovations that they were inventing would lead to some sort of utopia. And they were wrong. They were dead wrong because there were repercussions to the technology that they made that they did not even try to conceive of. The second generation of techno utopians were the cypherpunks, the people that said, we're currently in the embattlement of something that we think is a liberatory technology, so we want to think very carefully about what technologies we spend our time developing. And that was mostly PGP, or it was PGP encryption algorithms after PGP, and different pseudonymous, anonymous type technologies, right? Encryption technologies. And they thought very carefully about what the knock-on effects, what the side effects of the things that they were working on would be. And they predicted 100% of them, all of them. The only one that has not come to fruition is black markets for assassination, right? And there was one. Technically, there was one that
It
existed.
has. It's just called glowies. So it's called a honeypot. It's just called a honeypot.
It's called a honeypot. Well, technically, that it existed for like a very short time, and it could have been a glow pot. Who could, whatever. Except for that, they predicted 100% of the knock-on effects of the technology that they were making, and then the third generation. And so that's important. Like they matured technically. Now, the third generation of techno utopians were like the postmodern crypto anarchists, which are different. People, the only person I know of to cite would be Cody Wilson, right? And he said, wait a minute, if all of this dialogue back and forth was about like what we're engineering the technology for and what the knock-on effects are going to be, and the second generation had a problem with engineering both at the same time, what if I engineer the byproducts first? In fact, that's the whole point. If I engineer the byproducts of a technology that is already in fruition, the regime cannot drop it like it's poison. If I put poison in it, right? For instance, 3D printing. That was the whole point. If you make 3D printing somehow connected to something that is politically very important to the regime in terms of something that they want to reduce, right? So that would be the proliferation of arms, right? If you could connect the byproducts of something you make to a technology that the regime cannot unanimously say, okay, we have to destroy all of this right now. The regime cannot, they haven't proven that they can start Butlerian jihad, right? They can't stop technology. So attach something that you want to preserve as a byproduct of a technology that already exists. And that is kind of the praxeological layer that I'm trying to get to. That's the one I'm rooting for. You may, out of the different texts that, I'm going over in the homework series on my Odyssey channel, like you may draw a different praxeological conclusion entirely, and that's fine. Please go explore that, because I would much rather have, a very successful, sensitive young men than not successful, sensitive young men. But what I'm rooting for is this type of praxis: is engineer byproducts first, attach it to a technology that can't be Butlerian jihaded out of existence, because guess what? We're never getting that. By the way, the regime is now complicit in distributing something that you want to proliferate. Think Bitcoin of Bibles, if that makes any sense.
That's definitely an interesting theory there. So this is off-topic question, but I see that your name is Mikeofpol. So why did you choose Pol? It's quite an interesting choice.
So, well, it's not really. It's actually quite germane, I actually think. It's Michelangelo of Pol/Pol, right? Of the board on 4chan Pol, politically incorrect. Um, that's that's the thing. I was only really a lurker on Pol for a little bit, but I guess it left an impression on me. And that's funny, because I was kind of a new head. You're not allowed to say the F slur, I think. Yeah, I was kind of a new head to 4chan in general, because I always had based IRL friends. So I never really had to like go online to experience like, oh, based conversations with people. And so like as soon as I realized that there was like tons of my based IRL friends, but they just happened to be online, I think that was kind of like a moment for me where I was like, oh shoot, this is actually like pretty cool. There's a bunch of us. Like that's super cool. And I only got to 4chan whenever I was in like college, really. Like I visited a few times in high school, but little side thing.
Yes, I think that's all part of our journey. But I was just curious, so how did you come about finding this niche space on the internet? We all have our fun radicalization story. Mine was I got radicalized by Gamergate, followed the Sargon to Spencer pipeline, and kind of went from there. But I was one of those people. But how did you find your way here?
So I would like to say I had something more interesting than that, but I think I had the Sargon to AA pipeline. I mean, realistically, but what I would like to dress myself up as, if I was going to, fully flesh out my alter ego here, would be something like, eventually, and this is partially true, um, a lot of the gun cad, like philosophical theory, uh, that kind of led to like a true disdain of the elite that we currently have. And to their credit, and I guess their non-credit, to any elite at all, I do believe that hierarchy is part of human virtue. But I think that kind of began my pipeline as well. There were several tracks I kind of followed, because like at core I was some sort of libertarian, lib right, lib left, didn't matter. I like guns, whatever, as a kid. And then 2016 happened. I was like, like we were thinking it was going to be Bernie v Trump, and I was like, an honest person who's going to be disastrous is if he gets into office in Bernie. But at least he's honest, so that'll be interesting to see how power politics works. And then as soon as he got cucked in front of everyone in the nation, I was like, yo, power politics works weird. And then that kind of started my journey. And so whenever I saw my feed actually on YouTube start recommending like Charlemagne and AA, and they start talking about some of the stuff about power politics, I was sucked in immediately because I was like, yo, I've been curious about this.
No, it was truly radicalization friendly. I'm glad that like AA and them were coming up as I was leaving the old alt right, as I was dying in that disaster.
Yeah,
Absolute cancer that the original alt right was.
dude, R.I.P. Richie Spence, dude. R.I.P. CNN contributor Richie Spence, dude.
The memes from that era were just great, but
Oh yeah, memes are
we
good.
each have our own different and unique radicalization story for how we came into this esoteric club of politics. How we broke away from the sheep, so to speak.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And there's more to that, and there's definitely some, I think as Americans, like we definitely pill around in conspiracy theory circles more often than not, because as it turns out, there's more conspiracies in America than a lot of other places, and so it's more of a funny rabbit hole to get onto YouTube and kind of delve into those regions, like for instance, like things that we know are not, they're like actual conspiracies, like MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, all these things like we take as a given, I think now, and now that we have sort of a more sophisticated lens to look at these things, we say, oh, it's just like power politics working in the way of like might makes right in some sense, and so control of the populace has to be established, and so there was a Machiavellian scheme behind some of these intelligence assets actually doing some of these things, and that's with hindsight. Hindsight is 2020, but I think like coming to this point, we kind of like had this instinct because there's so many conspiracies that are actually real, at least in America. We're like, something is really not right with our thinking, and so I think that predisposes a lot of us to actually think of this way. So this another reason why red pilling people is actually not that hard. There's plenty of uncles that are Q boomer that you could just nudge toward Moldbug with a little push. I did it to my uncle. It's not that hard.
Please, if you can, save your Q boomer, boomers from the QAnon like Fed honeypot, which is still going. I'm still surprised that this like thing still has people entrapped, but you got to save them from this retardation because it's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's honestly pretty bad, but it's it is kind of like funny to see in bemusement as well. Like there is something entertaining about the Q boomer uncle. That's not, it's not necessarily harmless, but it is kind of harmless. Where it's like, well, at least they're our guy, and they still believe in the Patriots stand up kind of malarkey. Like one day these Patriots will stand up, and we won't have it with our country anymore getting taken over by comedy. Like that's fun, but at least they're on your side. So at least whenever you spurg out at Thanksgiving, at least you have a friend. So that's at least something positive.
No, yeah, they're definitely not enemies. They're obviously friendly category. They're just misguided. So don't place them in the misguided. But if you can't save them and bring them over to where they should be, definitely do so because again, missed opportunity is a missed opportunity.
Right. So I wanted to move on to one more quote, if I might. This is
Go on
from
ahead.
this is from The Agony and Power of the collection, right? The White Terror of the World Order, page 65. It is like a body that changes its cells constantly while remaining the same. Soon every molecule of the American nation will have come from somewhere else, as if by transformation. America will be Black, Indian, Hispanic, and Puerto Rican while remaining America, and it will be all the more mythically American, in that it will no longer be authentically American, right? And so this is Baudrillard, being essentially like a right-wing Anon Spurgoid, right? He's saying, oh yeah, dude, isn't it funny how hyperreality like actually makes this comes to fruition, that eventually America will be so un-American that it's ultra American? Like there's so much good. There's like based quotes. So there's so many based quotes in here, and you have to see through some of the BS, and then sometimes there's like a golden nugget like this, and you're like, oh yeah, some of these guys actually knew what was going on, because that's obviously happening, right? If you see the mixed media messaging of the shit libs right now, it's definitely something like, oh yeah, the best American is Somali, actually. You know, what? I obviously, like, to us that's ridiculous on its face, but some of the legwork of discovering this, especially in 2005, whenever this book was written. I don't know if you look at the demographic stats back then, but it wasn't that clear that that phenomenon was happening, or happening to the extent it's happening now, happening then, if you get me.
No, I feel like this was part of my radicalization journey, was kind of realizing that something was fundamentally changing with society, because I grew up in the early 2000s, like when we were still like 80% white or whatever. I don't remember the number was. It's weird how much things change in 10 years, but it still felt normal, it still felt like we were living in a good society. But then I was like, well, things are just getting worse, and like kind of feeling like a stranger in my own homeland. And like, why are all the colored areas, shit areas of town? And it's just like, these things kind of, you don't know the names of them, exactly what they are, but the tales are there for you to kind of like sniff out that this lie isn't working.
So here we get into Baudrillard's kind of subtle reformulation of anarcho-tyranny, right? This is page 66. More bigoted in that it will have become, in fact, multiracial and multicultural, and that all the more imperialist, and that is led by the descendants of slaves. That is the subtle and unassailable logic of power. It cannot be changed, right? He's saying, like, he's drawing a connection to Haiti there. I think it's more subtly alluded to in the text further in that, but I'm just, spoiler warning.
The
That's
definition of a shithole country.
The definition of a shithole country, right? He's saying, like, oh look, it's gonna get in this kind of, also is referential to Foucault's boomerang, right? Foucault's boomerang is a concept that any he coins it as like imperialist structure, right? Any imperialist structure will actually defeat its original purpose and come back and hurt you, right? He's also talking about the same thing there. This hyper real logic of like, oh yes, the best American is not American, actually comes back and hits you right in the face.
Well, yeah, because the revolution must go on.
Right.
And you also, there's also this like almost like it's analogy of like Calvinists understand that you need to be like punished for your sin of racism, and this is ingrained, etched in the progressive religions, basically the commandment. That like basically because you've committed this mortal sin, you must be destroyed essentially, and like it doesn't matter if you side with them, and like betray your race or whatever. You're still guilty, and therefore should be destroyed ultimately. You'll just be destroyed last, and you'll get more goy slop though. So that's kind of what they're offering here.
Right. So this is page 67. Many people will underestimate the fierce jealousy mixed with the nostalgia of a disenchanted culture for all singular cultures. And singular cultures, I mean single ethnos. I don't know what you can say on the YouTubes, but you get what I'm nudging at there. It's like you're actually imbuing this culture with this the meta culture, the new culture, with some sort of slow motion kind of rebellion. It has like this slow simmering resentment for its nostalgia for the good times of singular cultures, if you get the analogy there.
Yes, and there's plenty of nostalgia that goes around, considering the hellscape that we live in, and just decline, civilizational decline that we live in.
It just dawned on me, like, you can even see this in, oh god, I can't say that joke, in Hotep community, right? The Hotep have a certain type of, like, angry nostalgia for, like, we was kangs, right? Like, it's definitely a more activated in the violent spirituality of the thing, the violent symbology of the thing. Like, there's definitely some sort of simmering anger towards the thing because it's like an accepting of the untruth, but that's the thing that we have to accept for the time being, because there's, the postmodernist core thesis is that, like, there's a breakdown of like grand hegemony, of grand hegemonic values, and grand narratives, right? We can't depend on these overarching structures, and I think that's true, right? The Hotep are a uh, break off structure, a break off story of their own, right? And they also have this little bit of modernity and this kind of like anger towards the monoculture that is more healthy. Monocultures are more healthy, like we just know this is true, and so they have the same sort of resentment kind of boiling in them.
Definitely. It's definitely an interesting question, but I get the sense that like we're in the stage of decline of like late Soviet Union, basically, where we have like these elderly, insane people in charge of things, and the things just break down until eventually the empire like collapses, so to speak, and then that kind of lays the groundwork for something new to come. I feel like we're kind of in that cycle of the civilizational decline. I don't know if you're getting the same drift. Do you think we're like further along, or where do you think we're at in like the decline cycle?
So my analysis of like the circular history thing, right? Different people have different opinions on where we're at in the Kali Yuga. I think that I think the Kali Yuga has broken a little bit. I think that there requires a gargantuan effort to actually break us back into the Kali Yugic cycle. I actually think that there is something about modernity that it has a stultifying, a freezing characteristic to it, where um, all of these negative actors that are our ruling class definitely have something to gain by freezing the status quo in time. And you know, the elites that we have today are more powerful than I would argue more powerful than any we've had in history, and so they are trying their damnedest to stultify, you know, the movement of history in this real cyclical sense. And I think that requires some real action from people who want to try to become tens, you know, to have this great symbolic challenge their own death, maybe submit their own death in the symbolic back and forth in this dialectic character that this conversation we have with our regime elites in order to bring us back to the Kali Yugic cycle. So I think we're kind of stuck in time until um, someone like Ford One, or Elon, or you know, someone, please, anyone. Like we need to have a Caesar before we can say Caesar will come, right? Like someone tried to be him. Is my thesis.
Okay, that's interesting. So you think the disc is frozen actually at the moment, and we're not even actually turning. So
Right.
we're not even making negative progress. Actually, we're just like stagnating essentially.
Right, and that goes
Almost.
into something that I've been working on for a long time, which is schizopolitics, right? I think the stultifying of time in this way, like the Fukuyama. See, Baudrillard doesn't like Fukuyama, but I'm gonna use Fukuyama because Baudrillard has a different way of talking about the freezing of time than Fukuyama, but Fukuyama is the easiest way to talk about this. The freezing of time actually causes like this nascent schizophrenia in people. Like it really does. Like the reason why I have this intuition that we're frozen in time in the Kali Yuga can't, you know, the natural process can't continue, is because like were people this schizophrenic in the fall of Rome? Hell no, they weren't. They were crazy, but they weren't this schizophrenic. And I think there's this difference between like schizopolitics and like the insanity of the fall. That's something totally different.
Yeah, I don't think in the middle of the road, collapsing Roman Republic, they had like homeless people just like stabbing people to death, and like the media cheering them on as like the new martyr essentially for the
Right,
state
they had bandits,
religion.
but they had bandits, right? That is the insanity of decline. But they didn't have this
It's like this
kind of
promorphization and religiousization. I hate to use that word defaming the sacred here, but it's kind of what it is, a sacredization for the progressive faith, essentially, to keep it going.
Right, and that's the thing is like, and Baudrillard's conception of the freezing of time, it's something more akin to there is a point. He goes on about this in his book Fatal Strategies, where he talks about I've tried to identify the time at which time ceased, and he goes on and quotes a guy named Sirianetti. I haven't read him yet, but I need to. I need to go back and get some of his quotes to see what Baudrillard saw in him. But there's this insanity point in time that Baudrillard identifies in his book, uh, Fatal Strategies, and it's actually impossible to identify it. Like, we might say, oh, the passage of any one of the spicy amendments to the American Constitution that we would like to undo, or the French Revolution, or World War II, or whatever. Like, you can identify any point in history, but the thing is that as much as that's spiritually true, it's not actually true, right? It's actually impossible to identify the freezing point of time, and that's what makes it like a difficult task to unfreeze it, right? You can't find the root cause in a diagnostic sense.
Yeah, because it's metaphysical. It's not something that like you can like really document.
Right, right.
It's in like one of those strange categories that like human beings can't actually document or understand that. Actually, at least not on this realm.
Or not
So it's
anymore.
kind of
Or I would say not anymore, right? Like, you could definitely see like the polemics of like the Greeks or something, like documenting something of the metaphysical and what they were feeling, like the spirit of the age, or something like that, right? Something to that character. But that's something that our philosophers or our historians haven't thought about since. Uh, well, you can't tell when. See, that's the thing, right? We can go back and say, oh, this was definitely before the freezing of time, and we can say, oh, this was after the freezing of time. But you can never triangulate the two to find where time froze, and that's the tricky thing.
it definitely is tricky,
I did
but
have
equally
another.
fascinating.
I did have another base quote, and just like, I know we've been talking about like postmodernists and or one of my favorite postmodernists, which makes it like more cringe. Oh, a right wing guy has a favorite postmodernist. That's cringe. But just to sell you guys on on how based the postmoderns can really be. So here's a quote, just totally out of context. Hispanics are literally cannibalizing the United States. That is from page 71 of the White Terror and World Order. So, I mean, and he's talking about here about the continued like biopower element of like the outside of America is more American than America. He's continuing along the same reason, but he's actually like kind of enumerating a point that I think we all feel, and he's very subtly hinting at it, only as like a cultural critique point of view there, but he's saying what we mean, which is like, yeah, that's true.
It kind of is true, though. I mean, when you see, have you seen that picture going around on Twitter where it's just like that horde heading towards the border and they have their
Oh, dude.
flags, and it's
Oh,
just
man.
like, this is an army. They don't have weapons, but it's nonetheless accomplishes the same thing. Like we used to call these things in history armies. There's a reason why the Romans fought against the barbarians. We have this notion of, oh, immigrants, they're just fleeing war zones. No, it's about taking your land and like forever changing, taking your land from your people and your generations. Like this is
Right.
for real here. This is not some, libtard, notion of like, oh, let's just sing, kumbaya, and like, let's all enjoy Coca-Cola, enjoy our video games. Again, it's this insane notion, like, this is reality we're dealing with here, and this is how human beings have always acted and always will.
And just to prove how cringe I am, like, I'm gonna signal boost that point as a dude that had a Mexican girlfriend from Oaxaca for a while. So yes, I'm gonna signal boost that point. Yes, that is the subtext. And I almost fell for it. Sucks for them. I escaped. Um, let's see what else. I'm still looking for another quote. If you want to go over a little
Going
bit
back
more.
to the modern philosophers point, I think I want to touch on something like, I mean, like our philosophers today are so piss poor that like the best we've got is Jordan Peterson. He talks about the ass represents chaos in Western. That might be joking. This is the pinnacle.
Tits are ordered one.
you know, it represents chaos in the feminine order of Western civilization. And that is the most striking and esoteric thing that Western civilization has come up with in 80 years. Just think about that for 5 seconds. That this is the best we've got. Because all the rest of the philosophers we have are basically just shit libs. That's it. That's
Right.
all they are. Just shit lib propagandists.
Well, you see, and that's the thing. I think that anyone that does try to think hard does, like, every lie begins in a grain of truth. This is a very Eastern philosophy type of Taoist way of thinking about things. But I think there's something to it that I don't have a Bible verse that backs me up here. But I think, like, if we go back to Tao with this, every lie grain of truth type of idea, I do think there's something to steal there, and that's like kind of my whole point of reading these very cringe people is, or what my purpose is in that endeavor is trying to find that little nugget of truth that's like, yep, that's based. I'll steal that, and we can incorporate that into this thing of ours.
I think we should learn the books of the enemy just to understand their tactics. It's always good to understand your enemy so that you can better understand how to defeat them, or at least
Right,
formulate strategies that will actually work.
right,
Because
and
again, it's one thing just to use the cope of they're libtards. Oh, good, that's great, but that doesn't achieve anything. And they're
right.
still in charge and like can put you in a gulag. So who's really in charge?
I
Who
put
gets the
it.
last laugh here?
I put it in the category of like, if we went back to the beginning of the stream where I was talking about, there's three different types of left-wing philosophers, and there's three different ways to read them. There's the ones that, like Baudrillard, are kind of based. There's ones that you can steal something from and disregard the rest, and there's ones that are totally disregardable, except for, like, you have to maybe go back to them to read something to understand something else, but otherwise disregard them. I think that most thinkers, most of the modern philosophers that we have, even the cringe ones, are of the type 2 variety of something like, there is something to steal there. And I really mean that in the evil jester type of I'm a thief in the night sense. Like, there is something to steal, and what that typically entails is stealing something that they said that they're afraid of, right? The regime is like, the American regime, in terms of its, like, local dominion.
Liberal hegemony is a good
Liberal
term for
hegemony,
it.
right? Liberal hegemony is not a big fan of you owning guns, for instance, right? We know this to be true. Like, if they weren't so concerned about it, they wouldn't be trying to grabbing them so often, if you will. And there's something to, like, a kernel of truth in the Second Amendment, how we think about the Second Amendment, or it or the modern philosophizing about the Second Amendment as some great ideal against tyranny, or something like that. And there's something true about the founding fathers thinking about the Second Amendment in that sort of way. Like, what is the kernel of truth there? Because, like, I carry a pistol on my hip every day, right? I've been accosted by homeless people who are literally insane. And, downtown, I work in mechanical trades, like, I can't avoid this stuff. Like, sometimes I have to work downtown, and there's crazy people down there, right? It's like, it's more of a self-defense thing for me. But
Yeah, you have
why?
to defend yourself against the zombies.
Right, dude. It's COD Black Ops zombies, dude. I mean, especially the downtown. I'm around Hush. Oh, it's not good.
It's not just your city, bro. I feel like it's everywhere in America. Just like every downtown becomes like a progressive like cancer like hub. It just becomes this infesting filth that infects, greater areas. But it starts in the downtown.
Right. So, what is the fear there? Is the fear that you can defend yourself against the horde, or is the fear that, in the true idealistic sense of the Second Amendment, like, what is it that the elite is actually after whenever they're like, let's ban all guns, right? What are they actually after? And I think that's what I'm trying to get at the kernel of truth here with like reading all the cringe people is, uh, if I can get at a roundabout way of figuring out what is it about the Second Amendment as a unique entity in the law, specifically in the U.S., like the Second Amendment as an entity in law is more about self-defense than anything else. Like, there's not a Second Amendment Article 2, subsection 4 that says, if this, this, and this proceed to rebellion, because, like, that's how it's pitched by like Con Inc. is like, and from my cold dead hands, like we patriots will rise up. But it's not encoded in law, right? And so that has to be encoded in a ideological possession of revolutionary politics, right? So that could or could not be something that the current elite are actually after, is like that hope for just defaulting toward revolutionary politics, or are they hoping to take away self-defense, from the zombie horde? That's an open question. I still don't have the answer to that. Like, it could be either, it could be both.
It probably is both, but I'm leaning towards the latter now because they really are defending the homeless and like mentally insane, and they're really like, almost sanctification of them as like they're, this underworld class that like serves the progressive cause, and like is martyrs for the religion of orthodoxy that must be maintained across society, and that's why they kind of push them so much now. Like they're defending them with cash bail. Almost no punishment, and you're punished if you try to defend yourself, as we see what happened in New York City, and that's going to become the norm everywhere across this country.
Right. And I think there's a bigger question of like whether that's a continuation of anarcho tyranny, or whether or not that's angling at this like a diminishment of the Second Amendment as a self-defense role. Like there's also an open question there about whether or not they're trying to increase the capacity of their agents or not. Like that, I feel as though like there's kind of three open questions there, and I haven't decided on them yet. Like if I was going to give you my intuition, I would also say, part two, they want to decrease your ability to defend against the horde so that you are more dependent on the state. That sounds like a contrite, Con Inc. point, but I think there's something to that, because I don't think that our current elites are smart enough to be like, oh yeah, I'm actually engineering anarcho tyranny. I think they're going after point two, which is like self-defense bad, and they accidentally make
Friend enemy distinction is what they're really doing. They just understand this very well. That's all it is. Like, we act like these people are like they're so smart and they're Machiavellian. No, they just understand friend enemy distinction. They know the hordes will defend them.
Right.
It can be used as puppets. It's that simple.
Right. And I don't want to go. I want to leave the debate open though as well, because like there are some people that are in the current higher echelon of the current elite that may have some thinking to anarcho tyranny. Like this could absolutely be the case, because we do see people like, Mr. G. Soros, my boy, hit rapper of the century. He's laying out hits like
the chief financier of progressivism, as we'll call him.
Yeah, you'll know him from his album Soros DAs and his hit track. Another one got released.
That's a good one.
It's a hit track. I don't like the track, but it's a good one. It's catchy. It's a earworm for sure. Let's see. I do want to look for. Here's one. So I think as kind of a closing note, because I'm kind of running out of time here, I did want to run one last point on you, which is opposition to. Oh, this is page 75 of the White Terror of World Order from the same book, Agony of Terror. Opposition to global hegemony cannot be the same as opposition to traditional oppression. It can only be something unpredictable, irreducible to the preventable terror of programming. Forced circulation, irreducible to the white terror of the world order, something antagonistic in the literal sense that opens a hole in this Western agony, something that leaves a trace in the monotony of the global order of terror, something that reintroduces a form of impossible exchange in this generalized exchange, right? So we have to go back and parse terms here. So generalized exchange, what he's talking about is like, pseudo Marxist stuff about like, oh, hyper reality is like, oh man, we are hyper exchanging the symbolic value of stuff. Like a BMW gets you a certain amount of symbolic value in a social sense, in the social scene, as Baudrillard puts it, and stuff like that. And it's like, this is a kind of terror of like ultimate euphoria. Like we can have anything. We live in the euphoria of exchange. And what he's saying is like that's part of making up hyper reality, right? And the what he wants to do, he wants to be done with this. This is near the end of his life. He says like, look, if there's any hope to cast this off of us, it has to be something symbolically irreducible. Like, so this is Cody Wilson again. Cody Wilson actually takes this theory and says it's Bushido code, right? In Bushido code, whenever you take up the sword, right, you take an oath to be a dead man, meaning there is no life in you, but there is in the emperor. You are a dead man walking, literally. You internalize this fact that there is no life left in you. Your death is an accident of history, and you will continue on until that accident of history happens because your life is the emperor's life, right? Something irreducible. You can't get, like, once you have internalized that, that is, it's just an accident of history. Like, you can't, no one can do anything with that. What could the regime do with that? So, giving yourself unto something like saying, I am just going to give up and just sell CNC machines that do X, Y, or Z. Like, let's say you sell I don't know, a coal gasification generator for people, right? You give your whole life to selling the plans or selling the machines or selling, like, getting these machines into people's hands because, guess what? Green energy, it's coming your way. This is a technocratic way of controlling regular people to kind of like humiliate them, right? And you give your life into the project of making sure, like, hey, you don't want to pay the green energy tax. Guess what? Here's a generator. I'll sell it to you. I'll sell you the plans for $500. I'll sell you the machine for 5,000. Doesn't matter. Actually, I'll give you the planes for free if you really beg me. Something like that. Like, I will give my life to this project of like defeating green energy tax or defeating I don't know,
the gray goo.
the gray goo, right? Or the censorship of Bibles, like, on God, that's coming pretty soon. No cap, for real. Unfortunately, hate to bring up Zoomer speak, but like that's coming very soon. Like, you know, something like that. Like, what can you undo that will be your life's project? Like, literally giving your life to this project is what I'm trying to aim you guys at. Something like Bitcoin to Bibles, the WikiLeaks of like base trad wives, the 3D printing guns, something like that. Can you think of something that is a similar project that is like an ultimate irreducible symbolic exchange that you're giving your life to? You cannot stop me. You cannot stop the signal. And that's my closing thesis.
I thought that was an excellent thesis, and there are many things to think about that. But Mr. Mikeofpol, it's been great to have you on. I think we had an excellent discussion, some interesting prognostication and thoughts there. I think there's also something we gleam out of it. Is there anything you'd like to show to the audience before we end the stream?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so you can find me on Substack. I'm at Mikeofpol.substack.com. You can also check out like my kind of, just cathartic, entertaining side on Twitter at Mikeofpol. I'm a musician, so I'm doing this kind of diss track series on all the DR guys. So just as kind of like a fun, happy thing where I'm just like, guess what? I'm dissing all you guys. So it's a fun cathartic little thing that I'm doing on the side for a musical project, and I'm doing that on Twitter. And then you can also find me on Odyssey, where I'm putting up the homework series, which I'm actually going through more of these texts and more of these dialogues and interviews that Cody Wilson, Nick Land, and Baudrillard had in the homework series, as well as kind of cataloging some of my music, and that's at Mikeofpol on Odyssey.
All right. That being said, if you did enjoy my content, please sub. That's all I have to show for tonight. Remember, everyone, the lie can't last forever. We will win in the end. Have a good rest of your night.
To victory!
To victory.